good afternoon. I didn't have my headset on, so I have absolutely no idea how you introduced me. But I'll assume it was along the lines of saying that what I want to talk to you about is a very simple proposition. I want to talk to you about the fact that engaging people is very much related to how you talk to people. In other words, whether that's your colleagues at work, or your husband, or your wife, or your children, how you engage them depends on the conversations you have with them. I'm a human being, we all are. We know what it feels like to be part of a great conversation. We feel special, we feel noticed, we feel important. We also know what it feels like to be overlooked or to be ignored. Take yourself back to the playground, and the cruelest thing a child can do to another child is to stop talking to that person. So I want to bring this most basic of human activities back into today's very modern world, which is full of technology, and see if there's still a place for it. I speak to you not as an academic, and I have to confess I haven't written a book, which I think makes me the only person here. I'm a practitioner. I consult, I have done for 20 plus years in the area of how you connect leaders to their employees, employee engagement, if you like. I want to talk about a problem that we have certainly in the Western world. And that problem is that we have leaders who have become disconnected from the people they lead. What we have is a breakdown in trust. People no longer automatically trust those people who lead them, and that implies in business as much as it does in politics. And we see this around the world. I can give you lots of statistics, they're out there. Trust is going down, and it has been for some time. The question is why? And I just want to recap a number of themes that have been touched on already today. So I will probably pull a few things together, and hopefully they'll all make sense. The first is that people expect to have a voice today. The days of quiet obedience, I think, are gone. People are better educated, they have the internet, they can make themselves heard, and they do. And what's more, they now expect to be heard. Okay, so from the Arab Spring to the shareholder revolution in the Western world, to the women of India who are protesting about how they're treated, to the workers in the Chinese factories that make iPhones for Apple, people are saying, no, listen to me. It's a big shift. The second shift, and it's related, and this has been touched on in the Generation Me thing, is what I call the death of deference. Deference is when you automatically give respect to someone on the basis of either their seniority or their age. The new generation entering the workplace views this differently. Respect for them has to be earned. And you can earn it whether you're 20 and Mark Zuckerberg, who launches Facebook, or you can be 80 and Nelson Mandela. But it doesn't come automatically in the way it used to. So that's a big change. The third big change, and you will recognize this, is that people are very legitimately asking their leaders, for whose benefit are you running your organization or institution? For whose benefit? We all see economies that are struggling, people struggling with wages, with job security, with shrinking pensions, yet they see people getting richer at the same time. They see banks in particular not investing, paying huge bonuses, and taking government bailouts at the same time. So they're rightly questioning, saying, well, actually, are we in this together, or are you running this just for the few people at the top? The last big trend that we're dealing with is the knowledge economy, or whatever it was called later, or the next version of that. The world is different. The knowledge economy has arrived. Ideas and innovation are probably more important now than production and factories. Increasingly, that's the case. Of course, managing and leading people in that kind of climate requires a fundamentally different dialogue. It requires you to talk differently. You can't force people to be creative. You can't make them have 30 ideas a day in the way that you can make them produce 30 boxes of something. You have to engage them. You have to talk to them differently. So some big shifts. And if I have to sum those up, and forgive me for the simplicity of this, we are moving from an era where we have controlled things to an era where we need to co-create. And put that in very plain language, we're moving from a period of telling people to talking with them. So leading in the modern era is about talking and co-creating. It can no longer be about controlling and merely telling people. Now, do leaders get this? That's the question. Many people before me today have said this is a trend that is irreversible. So what are they doing? Clearly, some don't. We only have to look around certain countries to realize that there are many people who cling on to the old way. And we can see many organizations that do the same, who refuse to accept that there is a new way in which they have to lead. But most leaders do get this. They do. They do understand that the world has changed, that they need to engage in different dialogue. But they struggle. They fully admit, and we talk to many, that they hang on to old habits. Old habits die hard. They take time to change. So we have a paradox, which is that the world is changing. Most leaders understand this. Most know that they need to do something differently, but they also know they haven't quite cracked it yet. And when we ask them, why? Why are you not just doing things differently? And they give you barriers. So these are barriers to dialogue, barriers that people tell us are the reasons they find it hard to talk differently. The first, unsurprisingly, is in the mind. It turns out that one of the biggest barriers to dialogue is in people's heads. Let me explain why. People are inherently empathic to one another. They like to be nice. So they struggle to say things which people don't like to hear. They struggle with difficult conversations, with very open dialogue. People have also been told, or taught themselves over time, to be cautious. We are cautious creatures. Evolution has taught us to be a little careful about what we say. So even if we're invited to speak openly, we don't necessarily do that. We don't necessarily say everything we think because we're not quite sure that it's safe to do that. And thirdly, we've been taught to talk in a certain way. Many of us enter into dialogue not really with the intention of understanding the other person, but with the intent of winning an argument, to get my point put across. I call this the lawyer game. There's a sort of a win-lose element. And we reward people for that. Schools and universities reward you for being right, for being better than someone else. The whole parliamentary system, certainly in the country I come from, the UK, is essentially built on conflict, on people arguing and shouting at each other and trying to win an argument. So there are lots of human reasons why actually just saying, oh, let's have more open dialogue is not that easy. There are also institutional reasons. And the biggest one is the hierarchy. Now, whether we like it or not, in most organizations, there is a hierarchy. And the problem with a hierarchy is that people start to worry about it. They start to worry about what the boss thinks. They start to worry about, should I say what the boss wants to hear rather than what the boss needs to hear? Or to put it another way, truth does not easily speak to power. Okay? Truth does not easily speak to power. It is difficult. Another barrier they give you is, well, it's about management attitudes. I am the boss. Okay? Most managers, most leaders still have an idea that leading is the same as having the answer, knowing the answer to all the questions. So engaging in dialogue isn't necessarily something they think they should be doing as leaders. Let me give some examples of leaders who have taken this to quite an extreme. The first is the chief executive of Lehman Brothers, the bank that so spectacularly collapsed in 2008. This man was known for organizing his schedule so that he never had to meet an employee. Never. Private car, private lift, private office. The message, I'm up here, I know. I don't need to talk to people. I understand, I'm the boss. Number one, okay? Number two, an example of a chief executive in the UK who ran a very large, the third largest bank. He no longer runs it, I should add. And this bank ultimately required a very large government bailout to save it from going under. But he used to run a morning meeting, except that the people who went to his meetings didn't call it the morning meeting, they called it the morning beating. Because this man did not like people disagreeing with him. And when they did, he told them they were wrong, to stop talking, and he'd move on. What do people do? Well, they do what they naturally do. They stop talking. So here we had one of the largest banks in Britain run by a leadership team without dialogue. There was no dialogue. Now, these are extreme examples, clearly. And most leaders are not like that. But what you will see, and I'm sure you'll recognize this, is elements of that. So we see lots of leaders and managers who they're more comfortable with a script, with something you've prepared that you can control. They will say, let's not focus on the questions, let me talk to you about the answers, the solutions, because that's what I'm here to talk to you about. You get leaders who say, I'm too busy to talk, I've got a business to run, I haven't got time to go and talk to lots of people. And you get leaders who mistake or confuse feedback for dialogue. They'll say, and in HR you'll know about this, we run an annual survey, so we know what people think. Yeah, we get some data every year. That's all you get, is data. Data is not the same as dialogue. So don't let them kid you that that's the case. So there are lots of barriers still in the way people think about what being a leader actually means. The final barrier they give is show me the money, okay? So yeah, well, let's talk. Make the case. You're in HR, I'm in communications. This is something we get asked a lot. What is the bottom line benefit of what this stuff is that you're proposing? And it's difficult, of course it is. Let me give you one quick example though. Poor dialogue actually costs. I work for the chief exec of a very large financial services business based in London, but they're all around the world. And he runs board meetings in various countries where they operate. And this is how it works, right? So he flies 12 people, and this is an example, to Cape Town in South Africa. So they all fly in, business class, of course, because they're important people. He books them a 5-star hotel, of course. He gives them the best food and the best South African wines. They're worth it, clearly. And then, I quote, he said, we have a meeting that's a complete waste of time. And I said, well, why? He said, well, it's a ritual. We don't actually have a dialogue. We don't actually have a conversation. We meet and we present and then we go away. It's a ritual. And organizations are full of rituals that masquerade, that pretend to be dialogue, but actually isn't. The performance management review is a classic one. Oh, well, let's have a conversation about you. Actually, we're going to go through a form and we'll tick some boxes. It's not a dialogue. Now, in this case, the cost of this dialogue, I'll bring it back to the point I'm trying to make, which is money. That one meeting in South Africa, he worked out, cost him about $60,000 to $70,000 in terms of salaries and airfares. He has 8 of these a year, $500,000. You can start to see the cost of rituals and of pseudo-dialogue is huge. So you can't always quantify the benefits, but you can certainly start to think about the costs. So those are the barriers. The question is, what can you do? So people know they need to talk differently. They know there are lots of reasons why they can't. How can you help? What happens here? We've learned 3 things. The first is that this is about leadership. So if you're going to think about changing the way your company has dialogue, you need to start at the top. Number two, you have to intervene on the level of a team. By its very nature, dialogue or conversation involves more than one person. It's not something I do on my own. I do it with other people. So you need to intervene on the level of the team or the department and find out how that department or team talks. And thirdly, very importantly, you have to be careful. How people talk is totally wrapped up with who they think they are. It's a big expression of their identity. So going in and saying to people, the way you talk is wrong, is risky. You might as well tell them the color of their eyes is wrong or they have a bad taste in friends. It's a difficult thing to do. You need to be sensitive. So what I want to do is share with you a framework that we've developed together with a leading business school in the UK, which is a way into talking about talking. This is a diagnostic tool. People fill it in themselves, which is important, so there's no judgment. It's their own assessment. So members of a team, of a board or whatever, fill this in, and it gives them data on 6 attributes of how they talk. And these are they. And incidentally, some of you might have filled in something in advance of coming here. We sent a link to get some sense of how you talk. Some of you filled it in. This is what that was about. So let me briefly explain this model to you. At the core of it sit the 2 fundamental building blocks of dialogue. And these go all the way back to Socrates in ancient Greece. And the 2 are voicing, so in other words, how comfortable are people saying what needs to be said? How skilled and willing are they and free do they feel to do that? Balanced with inquiry, which is how skilled and willing is this team to try to understand the position and thoughts of other people. So voicing and inquiry, they're the basic building blocks of any dialogue, and that's at home and anywhere else, listening and talking. There's a third element in there called productivity. In the modern world, we don't talk for the sake of talking. We talk to get things done. We want results. We want outputs. So you need to check whether dialogue is productive or not. The example I gave you of the man who takes his board to South Africa clearly didn't check this. He had lots of unproductive dialogue, and it cost him a lot of money. So at the core of this model of voicing, inquiry, and productivity, there are 3 other factors that through the research and the field work we've done, we've found to be influential in shaping or determining how effective a particular conversation is. And let me briefly run through these. The first one is power. Now, power is present, always. And it is neither good nor bad, inherently. It's there. The thing to assess when you look at dialogue is it being used constructively or destructively? So people need to debate whether power is helpful or not. The man I talked about who ran the morning beatings clearly abused his power. He used it to kill dialogue rather than to stimulate it. Structure is another one. In business, we like structure. We like predictability. We like to know that if we do A, then we get B, then we get C. So we have agendas and we control the meetings we have. And clearly that's good. And you won't be surprised that structure is linked to productivity to a large extent. But too much structure kills debate. It shuts down interesting avenues of dialogue that should be pursued because someone says, well, we haven't got time for that. We've only got 5 minutes. We need to move on. In that sense, structure can be unhelpful. So teams need to decide whether the structure they put on their conversations is right, or too rigid, or too loose. There is a balance, and each team has to find its own, but you need to talk about it. The final one we call attentiveness. We live in a busy world. We know that. We get distracted. A friend of mine or colleague recently said we have a global attention deficit. We're all too busy. Bring that back to a human level, though. If someone isn't fully present when they talk to you, it doesn't feel very nice. someone looking over your shoulder when they're trying to talk to you to see if something else is going on, makes you feel about that big. Presence is a gift. Your attention is a gift to other human beings. We sometimes forget that. Nelson Mandela talks about this very eloquently in his book, The Long Walk to Freedom, and he talks about some very formative experiences when he was young, when he used to go to tribal meetings, and he would watch the chief open the meeting at sunrise and then listen all day, and then close the meeting. And people I've worked with in South Africa have commented on the absolute presence and attentiveness with which Mandela listens, based on their interactions with him. And more importantly, they comment on how incredibly special that makes them feel. It's a gift. Once a leadership team can find a way of talking about how it talks, they can start to understand that that influences what happens in the rest of the organization. But it has to start there. Once they've done that, you can do all sorts of wonderful things, like have huge group dialogue processes, open space or World Cafe, or you can use fantastic crowdsourcing techniques to engage literally thousands of people in dialogue. But it has to start with an authentic commitment to dialogue at the top. If people don't sense that that is there, what you offer is pseudo-dialogue. And I think pseudo-dialogue is worse than no dialogue, because it's dishonest, and people don't like that. Let me sum up. How we talk matters. It matters a lot. As human beings, we know that. We fundamentally know that. In business, I think we forget it. Sometimes we forget it. So if you want to engage people better at work, have a dialogue with them. Make them part of the conversation. Make them feel they're in it, not watching it or hearing the outcome of it. Give them a voice. The trend that I've talked about, and others before me today, about the shift from controlling to co-creating, from telling to talking, is real. It's happening. So I think the challenge for today's leaders is not whether they agree with that, but how effectively and willingly they embrace that. So I'll leave you with two thoughts. The first is ask yourself, how good are you at having conversations? Reflect on some of these headings and actually say, am I really very good at this? I did this at home and I got some feedback. I'm not very good at it quite often. There's bits of this I don't do. So do that for yourself, but then also talk to your leaders, I would suggest, and say, sir or madam, we need to talk. We need to talk. And we need to talk about how we talk. Thank you.